they're even talking now already, like they were saying, like, oh, the bird flu is going to reach a peak in October. I repeat that in Jesus' name. How do you know that? Is that the same time that the cyber event's going to happen? The same time that they're going to try an economic trigger and do a crisis? I mean, what? So weird that you would say something like that. About as odd as the statement by the CIA the other day that they weren't using MK Ultra. What an odd thing to say. Nobody brought that up, right? So anyway, my point, again, be prepared. And we have many resources that we continually put out there, like ZStack, like Epoch Times, that you can support a couple of great causes and be prepared. And that brings us now to your daily intelligence briefing. But first, on the daily intelligence briefing, we're going to do a prophetic briefing. We're going to go back to 1996, and then I'm going to give a historic parallel. 1996, a Christian minister named Dumitru Duduman received a vision of a coming attack on America from both China and Russia. Now, we've been talking about this, and this was forwarded to me today by a great friend. But I want to just talk about part of this vision. God revealed this vision to him and said to Dumitru, "Stand there, don't move, and look," he continued. Now, this is through a pair of binoculars. "You will see what they are saying and what they are preparing for America. As I was looking, I saw a great light. A dark cloud appeared over it." The light is the United States. The cloud, obviously, is what the enemy plan is. "I saw the president of Russia, a short, chubby man, who said he was the president. I saw the president of Russia, and then a short, chubby man who said he was the president of China, and two others. The last two also said where they were from, but I did not understand. However, I gathered they were part of Russian-controlled territory. The men stepped out of the cloud. The Russian president began to speak to the Chinese one. Quote, 'I will give you the land with all the people, but you must free Taiwan of the Americans. Do not fear, we will attack them from behind,' end quote. A voice said to me, quote, 'Watch where the Russians penetrate America,' end quote. I saw these words being written, Alaska, Minnesota, and Florida. Then the man spoke again, 'When America goes to war with China, the Russians,' so you hear this again, when America goes to war with China, the Russians will strike without warning. The other two presidents spoke, 'We too will fight for you.' Each had a place already planned as a point of attack. All of them shook hands." Now listen to this, because this happened. And it is very much against Chinese culture to touch in this way. But we played the video on Patriot Radio where Xi held his arms out first and initiated the hug with the Russian president. Listen to this. All of them shook hands and hugged. Then they all signed a contract. One of them said, "We're sure that Korea and Cuba will be on our side too," speaking of North Korea. "Without a doubt, together we can destroy America." And then this is the last part. The president of Russia began to speak insistently. "Why let ourselves be led by the Americans? Why not rule the world ourselves? They have to be kicked out of Europe too. Then I could do as I please with Europe." This is a very, I'm just going to read the rest of the prophecy, guys. I'm just going to go for it. It's incredible. So we put the prophecy back up there. I'm going to read the rest of it. "The man standing behind me asked, 'This is what you saw. They act as friends, and they say they respect the treaties made together. But everything I've shown you is how it will really happen. You must tell them what is being planned against America. Then when it comes to pass, the people will remember the words the Lord has spoken.' 'Who are you?' I asked. 'I am the protector of America. America's sin has reached God. He will allow this destruction, for he can no longer stand such wickedness. God, however, still has people that worship him with a clean heart as they do his work.'" So pure heart and clean hands, which has been out there recently. "He has prepared a heavenly army to save these people. As I looked, a great army, well armed and dressed in white, appeared before me. Do you see that? The man asked. This army will go to battle to save my chosen ones. Then the difference between the godly and the ungodly will be evident. End of prophecy. Dmitro Duduman. Now, I have been talking with national leaders here in the last few days, and Floyd Brown posted on Twitter a story from a friend and patriot, Glenn Dobbs. Now, I'm going to read this story to you as well, because this August and this September, there's going to be a shaking here in America. There's going to be shaking in the world. And it's important that you hear this story and embrace this story before we get into the briefing. Because this is the level of courage that we need in the United States. So the greatest in the closest historic parallel that we have in modern times is one you may never have heard of. And it's the Civil War in Spain. It's the closest historic parallel that we have with America today. Communist forces began to infiltrate the government of Spain. Now remember, Spain kicked out, after 700 years of fighting, the Muslim armies. They fled to the Barbary Coast, became the Barbary Pirates. First war the United States really fought after the revolution was against the Barbary Pirates. The Spanish were known for freedom. The communists began to infiltrate at the behest of Joseph Stalin in the early 1930s. And as they infiltrated, they began, and this goes along the lines of what J.R. Nyquist briefed us on here a few weeks ago. They began pre-positioning arms, ammunition, uniforms inside Spain. And members of the government of Spain were in on it. 3 colonels found out about this plot and decided that Spain should remain free. One of those, Generalissimo Francisco Franco, who's been demonized since then, but we're going to hear a different side of that history today. And so these 3 colonels came together and they decided to defend Spain against this communist onslaught. And that's the context of the story that I'm about to share with you. It was posted by Floyd Brown. During the communist war against the democratic Spain, known to history as the Spanish Civil War of 1936 to 1939, under the orders of Joseph Stalin. Now remember that the communists always attack Christians this way. That's why we're seeing the targeting of churches. That's why we're seeing the targeting of leaders and their property beginning in the United States. All right, so under the orders of Joseph Stalin, more than 1,600 Catholic priests and 6,000 nuns were raped, tortured, and murdered by the communists. The Soviet NKVD, that was a precursor to this KGB, was sent to Spain to oversee the murder of thousands of anti-communists and Christian leaders. Many so-called intellectuals and academics from the U.S. and Britain went to Spain to fight for the communists. So the college professors. And they were called the International Brigades, and the U.S. contingent was called the Lincoln Brigade. Awaiting their rescue by the forces of Generalissimo Francisco Franco, several hundred civilians and military were holed up in the famous Alcazar fortress of Toledo under siege by the outnumbering communist militia forces. There's a few things here I want to unpack. First of all, the communist militias are part of their strategy, and we see communist militias today. Antifa, John Brown Gun Club, Socialist Rifle Association, etc. Second is that there were people who were willing to fight to the last breath for their freedom. All right, so the commanding officer of the Alcazar fortress and these freedom fighters was Colonel Eduardo Moscardo, later to become General Moscardo. The Minister of War, the Minister of Education, and General Riquelme tried to contact General Moscardo to urge him to surrender his troops and the civilians to Candido Cabello, who was the leader of the militia besieging the fortress. On July 23rd, Candido Cabello, so so this communist militia leader, telephoned Colonel Moscardo, threatening to kill Moscardo's son, Luis Moscardo, who had been captured if he didn't surrender Alcazar in 10 minutes. To prove his intentions, Cabello put the colonel's son on the telephone. The son uttered the single word, "Papa." The father asked his son, "What is happening, my boy?" "Nothing," answered the son. "They say they will shoot me if Alcazar does not surrender." And this is what his father answered, General Moscardo. "If it be true," replied Colonel Moscardo, "commend your soul to God, shout Viva España, and die like a hero. Goodbye, my son. A last kiss." "Goodbye, father," answered Luis. A very big kiss. When Cabello came back on the telephone, Colonel Moscardo announced that the period of grace of 10 minutes was unnecessary, that Alcazar will never surrender. Luis Moscardo was killed on August 23rd by the communists, and 1 month later, the siege of Alcazar was broken and its inhabitants freed by the nationalist anti-communist troops. We can only guess what lies ahead for America, but it is certain we are about to go through some difficult times. America can emerge intact, strong only to the extent of our people, young and old, rich and poor, are willing to stand strong, speak out loudly, and by the simple act of doing so, encourage hundreds of neighbors and friends to take their stand. It is unlikely any of us will be confronted with the tragic circumstances that confronted Colonel Moscardo, but it is that brand of courage that will be required of strong Christians now. You want to take a look at that story? It's posted up on Twitter. But that is the brand of courage that we need in the times that we're in. And now, the globalist front. From Technocracy News.
Naughty globalists.
The UN will sign the Pact of the Future in 60 days. And we just talked about that briefly. I'm going to keep this highlighted here for the next little while. This Pact of the Future is essentially one world government, one world economy, and one world religion heading us down that road. And if they don't get it, well, of course, they're going to try a war and then try to implement it. And what's standing between them and success is all of us. And that brings us to the China front. President Xi of China says we must coordinate the promotion of border, sea, and air defense construction and the economic and social development of border and coastal areas. In further comments, he said China faces new opportunities and challenges in border, coastal, and air defense due to geopolitical changes. And if we can bring that map up right there, that's how China is broken up with the Western, Central, Northern, Eastern, and Southern Command. And they're beginning to expand outwards now and project power. So China is continuing down that road. China's fortress economy. China has initiated a significant strategic shift toward a fortress economy designed to bolster national self-sufficiency and resilience against external shocks and allow the nation to withstand extreme situations, including protracted armed conflict. So in other words, they are preparing for World War III. Also, Vietnam's Coast Guard to hold first drills with the Philippines. Vietnam and the Philippines have conflicting territorial claims with China and each other in the South China Sea, but they're doing these exercises together as a check against China. Also, there has been an upgrade of U.S. fighter jets and their numbers in the Pacific. In early July, the U.S. presented a $10 million plan to modernize military aircraft stationed in the Japanese islands. And according to the announcement, significant changes will affect the Kadena Air Base, the closest U.S. military facility to Taiwan. And we have a list of those things here. 48 F-15s to be replaced by 36 F-15EXs. At Misawa Air Base, 36 F-16s replaced by 48 F-35As. And then Iwakuni Air Base, F-35B number adjustment. So what we're seeing is a buildup now of aircraft. Just as we've been talking about here, they've been clearing off airfields throughout the Pacific. And it looks like the United States, again, is preparing for war as well. That brings us now to the Middle East front. So in the last 24 hours, the Israelis have pulled off something absolutely unbelievable. First of all, the Israelis assassinated the commander of Hezbollah forces. And by the way, the guy responsible for the Beirut bombing that killed 241 Marines, why didn't the U.S. take this guy out a long time ago? That's a great question. We're going to get to that later. Also, in that same 24-hour period, the U.S. forces killed a Syrian general operating at the behest of Iran, and the Israelis killed the leader of Hamas in a personal residence in Tehran. Now, as a response, the supreme leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, announced that during the funeral of Senior Commander-in-Chief of Staff Fuad Shukr, that there would be a 48-hour pause and that Hezbollah would be resuming their attacks against Israel. Well, that was yesterday. Those attacks began today. Hezbollah began launching rockets into northern Israel, and we're going to have an update at the end of the show, just as a quick brief, because so much is changing as we're speaking. Israel has promised to respond to that, and they said they are not afraid of a regional war. This really does look like we're heading into a regional war in the Middle East, which again was predicted here just a couple of years ago when the war with Russia and Ukraine began. I want to move next, and I'm just going to keep our live feed up here. I want to move next to quickly the South America front. Now you can see Mr. Venezuela, and the protests continue against Maduro. But I want to just talk quickly about something that's been happening there. Maduro has arrested at least 1,200 of the protest leaders, he claims, probably not true. And he's going to go ahead and try and arrest another 1,000. And that is, again, drawing protesters into the city. Now, this is one of the strategies Jack Decker, way back in 2020, talked about that they would try to do here in America is round up and arrest not the high-level leaders as much as the mid-level leaders of the freedom movement that would pose the greatest threat, the people that have the most influence at the local level. So you're seeing Maduro follow that tactic and strategy. It's actually more of a strategy there in Venezuela, but it is not working, and the people are pushing back. And that brings us now to the Europe front. And Pope Francis tells LGBTQ conference, quote, he will be spiritually with all of you, united in prayer. I wish we had Bill Jasper just to comment on that one phrase right there, but the Pope continuing to go down a road that very clearly appears to be covering for sin. Also, from Visegrad 24, the cross of Padrao de São Lazaro, and I probably butchered that, with its rich history going back to the 14th century, has been a national Portuguese monument since 1910. Well, last night it was destroyed in an act of vandalism. Again, this is happening all over the world, a targeting of Christians, churches, leaders, and property. This is what's happening. And that brings us now to the national front. From zero hedge, a near stalling of production, U.S. manufacturing surveys collapse in July. In other words, production is stalling massively, and it appears that the manufacturing sector at least is bracing for something big here in the United States. Coming to us from Trevor Loudon, Kamala Harris has extensive communist ties. You don't say. And he has done exhaustive research on this. Kamala Harris, communism, America, they don't mix. And very clearly, America is fed up with the policies of communism that have come out of the Biden administration. And so Trevor Loudon just trying to be on the leading edge of this. If you need to share things with your friends and family about our communist ties. Take a look at that article. It's posted up on Twitter. Also today, the U.S. says a plea deal has been reached between the 9/11 mastermind Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and others and the United States government. The families of those killed in 9/11 furious over a plea deal. Think about how long it's taken to get to that point. 20 years? Really? Which brings up another question by J. Michael Waller from my colleague Chris Holton. How could the U.S. not find in 41 years one of the masterminds of the murders of 241 of our servicemen? This is speaking of the Beirut barracks bombing. Yet Israel could locate him and eliminate him within days. Perhaps there wasn't the political will to do that, and that's what that's all about. Also, John Guandolo has published a new report on the Hamas Muslim Brotherhood network in America. Yes, there is a network in America. Yes, it's huge. And yes, it's on almost every single college campus in the United States. Take a look at this report. It is a must-read for anybody who cares about the United States and wants to understand the jihadi infiltration into this country. From Kyle Scheidler, by the way, since we're scrutinizing the Secret Service, if we could bring this picture up, can we finally ask them about the times they let Al-Qaeda, Hamas, and Palestinian Islamic Jihad operatives within 5 feet of the president? And there's pictures of them all, so somebody can't say that's hyperbole. Great question. Why were we allowing those leaders tied to Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Al-Qaeda, the Muslim Brotherhood, near the President of the United States? And why are there members of the Muslim Brotherhood, Muslim brothers, in the White House, even to this day? Eric Metaxas maybe have an answer to that. I'm reading this book right now. It details the nightmare of secular leftist infiltration in the American church. It's time for a revolution against the corrupt Christian elites who have allowed this to happen. And this is a book called Shepherds for Sale, How Evangelical Leaders Traded the Truth for a Leftist Agenda. We're going to try to get Megan Basham on the show to discuss this book. I think it's extremely important because I don't think a lot of people in congregations across this country understand the level of infiltration and influence that has happened inside the American church. And that brings us now to the southern border with Texas. Texas versus the United States. Well, a U.S. appeals court has ruled the state of Texas can keep a 1,000-foot floating barrier in the Rio Grande River in order to deter illegal immigration. The decision was issued by a New Orleans-based Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, reverses a preliminary injunction previously granted by a lower court. I'm sure that's going to be appealed to the Supreme Court. And now to the Olympics. This is unjust. Biological male boxer viciously beats female opponent and forces her to quit in tears within seconds at the woke Olympics. And this just highlights. She said she'd never been punched that hard in her life. This person had been disqualified previously at a world championship for testing positive as a biological male. Which brings us to a Western Journal article. Girl paralyzed in volleyball match against trans player goes after woke Olympics for endangering women. I mean, how many people have to be hurt here before this insanity stops? And from Gateway Pundit, many of you don't know this, but Comic-Con is actually the largest event where child and human trafficking occurs in the United States. I had no idea when I found this out. Well, 14 people were arrested in a human trafficking sting at the Comic-Con event. Not surprising. And, many people, I mean, this isn't, a slam on comic books or something, right? But, you have the Super Bowl where it happens as well. So what is being done to address this stuff? And also be a fascinating inquiry into why the Super Bowl, why Comic-Con, why these events become these centers of gravity. Epoch Times, 3 Americans freed from Russia in a historic prisoner swap. The details of this are not, I don't know if they're fully out there yet, but we're going to keep reporting on this as it comes up. And then lastly, on the regional front, mom flown from Idaho to Utah for pregnancy complications, waits to learn they dismembered her son. Wow. Pro-abortion media outlets have recently shared emotional stories of women facing pregnancy complications in Idaho, where the state's Defense of Life Act protects most preborn children from induced abortion. And according to the New York Times, Nicole Miller was one of these women, and her story is incredibly disturbing. She was airlifted out of Idaho to Utah, and she underwent a D&E, dilation and evacuation abortion, procedure in which her baby boy, Maddox David, was dismembered. Even worse, it appears that Miller was unaware of the abortion until she awoke and was informed by a nurse that her son had been dismembered and removed from her womb. Wow. I mean, can you imagine what they're doing with all this? Can you imagine? It's just like the news just gets more disturbing and more disturbing and more disturbing. All right, while we attempt to get our guest on, I'm going to go real quick to some breaking news. And I'm going to see if we can get this up on the screen right now. So here's a real-time video that just came in from Visegrad 24 of the prisoner exchange today in Turkey between the USA, EU, and Russia, and all these prisoners being exchanged. I'm going to bring that up real quick. So it looks like that did in fact happen. We're probably going to get some more details here over the next little while. Also, just in from Venezuela, looks like Maduro is announcing the creation of prisons for opponents, saying his objective will be to turn them into, quote, re-education centers. Where have we heard that before? He's literally announcing the creation of concentration camps in Venezuela, and we still have people in the United States that are supporting Maduro? Really? How can that be possible at this point? Unbelievable. And also, just 9 minutes ago, breaking news, the opposition leader in Venezuela, I should say one of the opposition leaders in Venezuela, Marina Corina, announced huge protests across Venezuela on Saturday, so they're organizing and getting ready for that. So it looks like Venezuela is going to erupt now, and there is a huge push there to get Maduro out. Again, world leaders saying unless he shows some kind of audit that they're not going to accept Maduro as president, that Edmundo Gonzalez is actually the president of Venezuela. All right, also coming up, I want to go ahead and just shift a little bit. 15 minutes ago, it looks like, see if we got it up right now. Yeah, 16 minutes ago now. Biden says that the U.S. is committed to defend Israel against all threats from Iran. And we are watching live attacks right now by Hezbollah on Iran, and Hezbollah, on Israel at the behest of Iran. Obviously, they're working in close coordination. Let's see, the Israeli Air Force is beginning to strike back against Hezbollah targets that have been firing rockets against Israel. So that is now happening, and the escalation is occurring. What is also out there in the intelligence world is that Iran is going to strike similarly to what they did before with ballistic missiles and drones toward Israel here in the next little while. And that will obviously be met with response by Israel. And it looks like the gloves are kind of coming off there. Whew. Wow. Incredible. Wow. Incredible. All right. Our guest we're trying to get her on, is going to be joining us from Italy too. So want to talk a little bit about the Roman Empire. But first, before I do that, I want to check one more breaking news source here very, very quickly. Okay, yeah, I just got these videos in of the attack on Israel. Here it is. We can bring that video up here quickly. So it's again on northern Israel. Some of those, it looks like most of them actually, according to the reports coming in right now, were intercepted. Incredible stuff. All right, and it also looks like there is ongoing response by Israel right now against those Hezbollah positions in southern Lebanon. And just in, U.S. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham calls for the United States to support significant strikes against Iranian oil and gas infrastructure if they continue with their planned large-scale missile attack against Israel. So that's dragging the United States now into it by a senior U.S. senator. Also, U.S. President Joe Biden spoke earlier with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, where the two discussed escalating tensions with the possibility of a large-scale Iranian attack, with President Biden stating that Israel has a total support of the United States. And lastly, it looks like all of the axis of evil did attend that funeral in Iran earlier today. So, wow. And then lastly, kind of on a weird note, the Taliban weighed in and said that the Ayatollah Khomeini was behind the elimination of the head of Hezbollah. That's weird. So maybe they know something that we don't. Maybe he gave away the position or something, I don't know, to provoke a war with Israel. Anyway, short version, a lot is happening, and over the next 24 hours, just stay tuned to Patriot Radio Telegram feed, and we will continue to give you live breaking news as this appears to be an escalation into a regional war in the Middle East, and that we will have all of the coverage and analysis that you expect, the news behind the news and the story behind the story. Wow. So let's talk a little bit about saving America from the face and the fate of the Roman Empire. And what does that mean? Now, Christians in the Roman Empire spread very quickly, and as they spread throughout the Roman Empire, and as Christianity began to become the dominant force in the Roman Empire, the Oracle of Delphi, the Temple of Artemis, all of these things began to be put into disrepair, disuse, and eventually destroyed because they didn't need them anymore. They didn't need these pagan shrines. So it was the expansion of Christianity that began to eliminate the pagan cults that were into orgies and into blood sacrifices, began to eliminate those from all of the Roman Empire. Yet, the Roman Empire still collapsed. And in fact, it split into two. And again, if you don't know the history, two brothers took over the east and the west of the Roman Empire. Now, this was prophesied in 2nd Esdras. It's part of the Apocrypha in the 1611 King James Bible. And the reason it was put in there is because the church, for at least the better part of 1800 years, understood this prophecy to talk about the last times in the split and the dissolution of the Roman Empire. Now, I want to just go through that history very quickly because some of you haven't heard it, and some of you have if you listen to Patriot Radio for any time. We know that when God speaks through somebody and it begins to come true, that we need to be paying attention to it. Well, back in 200 AD, and it was probably before 200 AD, but that's the date that we have for the extant copy. 200 AD, there was a prophecy written about the dissolution of the Roman Empire, that it would split. And this prophecy was combined by prophecy of Ephraim the Syrian. So these are two prophecies together. And essentially it's this, that the Eastern and Western Roman empires would split in two, that two brothers would lead the Eastern Roman Empire and the Western Roman Empire. And that they would exist as a first iteration for a while, and then the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire would be destroyed, and then they would come back. And then they would be destroyed again, and at the last times they would come back in a third iteration, each one, for a very brief period of time. Also, 2nd Esdras talked about the rise of the dragon nations of Arabia. The dragon nations of Arabia, okay, so Islam did not arise until 632. So this is 400 years ahead of time. And that's why many people in the church depicted Islam as a dragon. In fact, there's a very famous icon of St. George with a spear stabbing a dragon. And in church history, the dragon has always represented Islam. And that came from the prophecy, 2nd Esdras. So again, there would be this first iteration, and that first iteration lasted into the late 400s for the Western Roman Empire, and it was eventually destroyed. Now, in 800, Charlemagne became the first Holy Roman Emperor and brought back the Western Roman Empire. So that was the start of the second iteration of the Western Roman Empire. Eastern Roman Empire lasted until 1453, and this is depicted in The Lord of the Rings, the Great White Shining City. 1453, the Islamic hordes invaded and conquered Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul, and they took the nuns and the priests and did horrendous things to them on the altar of the Hagia Sophia. This is this famous church there. And then they turned it into a mosque. And every caliph was ordained in the Hagia Sophia. Now, after that, the remnants of that Eastern Roman Empire, also called the Byzantine Empire, fled to Russia. They intermarried with the line of Nicholas I, Tsar Nicholas I. That line, they intermarried, and they became the Tsar. Tsar is the Russian word for Caesar. So that second iteration, Charlemagne started, and it goes through and eventually ends up, the Holy Roman Emperor, in Germany. So you have the Western Roman Empire in Germany with the Kaisers. Kaiser is the German word for, you guessed it, Caesar. So the two Roman empires still exist in the second iteration, both of them until 1917, when the Romanov czars were murdered by the communists. And then the Western Roman Empire, the Germans were effectively, now I know they were officially defeated in 1918, but they were effectively defeated in 1917. And then the Western Roman Empire had a third iteration. In 1932, the rise of Adolf Hitler. And in fact, he understood the history and he called the Third Reich. That's why he used that term. And this prophecy said that that iteration would be quickly defeated. It said that the Eastern Roman Empire would have another third iteration that would rise. Well, today on the streets of Russia, they call themselves the Eastern Roman Empire. I believe Putin believes that he is the guy defending the Eastern Roman Empire, and this may be that third iteration of the Eastern Roman Empire that would last for a short time. Well, also 2nd Esdras says that there would be a defeat of Islam and the dragon nations of Arabia, and then the last times there would be a rise of those dragon nations again for a short period of time. So the caliphate was officially abolished in 1924, but it actually was defeated in you guessed it, 17. And so in 1924, the caliphate was abolished. In 1928, Hassan al-Banna started the Muslim Brotherhood. And As a result of starting the Muslim Brotherhood, he started it with the express intention of reestablishing the caliphate. That's why it's so important when the Muslim Brotherhood says that Recep Erdogan meets the qualifications of the caliph, and then Recep Erdogan turns the Hagia Sophia back from a museum, which happened in 1924, to a mosque. That has significant implications. Now, the Roman pagan gods were dedicated, obviously, to demons. And it's this date in history, August 1st, is very interesting. But they were eventually destroyed, and those were ruins as a result of Reformation. Now, on this actual date today, 216 BC, the Temple of Victoria on Palatine Hill was dedicated. 258 BC, the Temple of Spes was dedicated. 193 BC, Marcus Porcius Cato consecrated the Temple of Victoria. And it's interesting that a later emperor condemned all heresies so that their followers did not have a right to use priest titles and hold meetings. And in addition to that, even, besides condemning all these heresies, and all of those things being dedicated on this date, okay, just watch this. It spelled the end of the demonic influence from a Reformation perspective in the Roman Empire. And yes, Rome fell, but Christianity arose. And Christianity has been the greatest force for good in the entire world. And I'm going to crush something right now. A lot of people will bring up the Crusades. We need to talk about the Crusades and blah, 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 blah. There has been a historical analysis done of every battle fought by Islam versus Christianity. Hundreds of battles in Spain alone. How many battles in the Crusade? 20. You could argue maybe 30 in a very shorter period of time. And all of them were done in a defensive aspect after hundreds of years of Islamic attacks of the Christian world. Okay? That's the context, the historical context. No one can refute that. History shows Christianity has bred more missionaries, has helped more widows and orphans, more food, more resources, more rights. The rise of Christianity transformed the world. It's been the greatest force for good. And in that sphere, the greatest force for good in Christian nations, the United States, has been number one. The United States Congress, United States Senate, in an investigation, recognized the United States was a Christian country. United States Supreme Court, in the Holy Trinity case, recognized the United States as a Christian country. 1891. So what we're talking about is, as the pagan gods were destroyed and the kingdom of God spread, more good happened. Now, was there bad stuff that happened in there? Of course. But the greatest force for good has been the rise of Christianity. And so, not wanting to face the fate of Rome, the answer here in the United States, just like was said in the original prophetic word that I just read from Dumitru Duduman, is when we follow God's word, we don't just hear it, we don't just read it, we obey it. We repent and we turn back to God. That is what saves us from the fate that befell the Roman Empire, but also it allows the kingdom of God to expand. Now, the Roman Empire, yeah, they opened up to Christianity, but still there was rife paganism there until even after the Roman Empire was destroyed. But it was Christianity that eventually turned those temples into ruin. And so the way to save the United States is Jesus. The way to have peace, prosperity here is Jesus. And the rest of the world, the free peoples in the rest of the world are watching to see what we're going to do. But I'm here to tell you there's going to be a shaking here in this August and September. There is going to be a shaking here in the United States. And the question is, are we ready to go through that and be a blessing instead of a burden? Are we ready to remove the idols from the United States of America, from our lives, these idols that are allowing evil to come in? And we all have idols in our life. And again, talking from a spiritual perspective, we all have idols in our life. But in this country, the idol of transgenderism, the idol of money, the idol of addiction, the idol of TV. I mean, we have a TV show even called American Idol. Are we willing to take those idols down? And it starts everyone here at the local level. The Maccabee family, when there was that famous standing up against Antiochus Epiphanes IV, the picture of the Antichrist, and standing up against those idols that he was mandating people worship, it all started at the local level with community. And as we showed last time, there was a ton of blasphemy, attacks on Christians, but it's going to be all of us that have that courage of Colonel Moscardo to sacrifice everything, our reputations, or even put our honor on the line, our lives, to see this country saved and continued for another generation. And I want to just end here in the last 2 minutes with some breaking news, because what I just said goes for Venezuela as well. Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado has called for protests in every city in Venezuela. Also, the Chinese have just come out. If the Chinese economy falls into the trap of low inflation, the consequences will be severe. Therefore, they're going to set a hard target of 2 to 3% CDI growth or CPI growth. What does that mean quickly? It'll be an inflationary shockwave around the world. Also, there was a huge stock market sell-off today as well, with disappointing economic data, raising the prospect of a pre-election recession. They're starting the narrative for this economic crisis that we've been talking about. They're trying to plan. So again, be prepared. This is a great opportunity right now. Be prepared. And then lastly, we're going to do a quick check here. Looks like, there we go. Looks like the funeral for the leader of Hamas will be tomorrow in Qatar. So probably those rocket attacks today with Hezbollah are just a precursor for what's about to happen. Well, I just want to say thank you to everybody out in Patriot Radio Land for watching and for all the support and prayers. I mean, we reach thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of people. I just want to thank you for that. This is a very serious time, but also a time where we can have joy, because there is so much happening, but we have been given so much warning and ability to be ready for it, to be a blessing to people who are going to be questioning, who are going to be driven to their knees with the shaking of this country. And they're going to want to know the truth about Jesus Christ. They're going to want to know that. And are we ready to welcome them with open arms, no matter what they look like, no matter what they're wearing? Because ultimately, our enemy is not our neighbor. Our enemy is Satan. This is Matt Shea. Thank you for joining me on Patriot Radio today. May God bless all of you. He is making this generation the greatest one. The awakening is here. Keep up the fight.